start out and say hello and thank you for attending this afternoon's mental health virtual roundtable presented by the California Association of Youth Courts. This roundtable will be discussing the mental health issues that may be impacting our juvenile justice system and solutions to these issues. I would like to thank our Youth Advisory Board President, Wesley Liu, and his team of absolutely remarkable youths for their outstanding work in making this presentation possible. They really, truly do a heck of a job. I'd also like to thank Dr. Michael Johnson, Dr. Amy Bacharach, and Mr. Chris Rasmussen for their presentations today. I know you'll find them to be remarkable, informative, and useful to all of us engaged in this arena of juvenile justice reform. Hope you appreciate, enjoy, and support the work we are doing. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Wesley for introductions, further introductions, background of our speakers. If you care to, we would like to have you in the chat include your name and an email address for you again in the chat if you can, if you're comfortable with that, so we can stay in touch with you. So having that been said, I'm going to turn it over to Wesley. I thank everybody for being here. I'm proud and honored of the work that you do and the work to be done. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Derek, for the introduction. I'm going to start off by introducing our three speakers here today. The first is Dr. Michael Johnson. Dr. Johnson began his social work career with a master's degree in social work from the St. Louis University. After 8 years in the corrections department of St. Louis, he completed a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership at Azusa Pacific University. He taught military social work at University of Southern California. He currently is the Director of Behavioral Health with PESA, Parents, Education, and Students in Action, where he works with teenagers and youth through the Los Angeles Superior Court Teen Court program. Our next presenter here today is Dr. Amy Bacharach. She is a senior research analyst with the Judicial Council of California, where she works on state policy issues in the areas of juvenile justice, collaborative justice, and human trafficking, specializing in evidence-based practices. She has done extensive research on juvenile issues, including runaway behavior, substance abuse, and survival, sex, and human trafficking in adolescence, and has authored numerous articles, reports, and a book chapter. Our third panelist here today is Chris Rasmussen. Chris is a retired police officer with over 30 years of service. His various assignments included public relations, homeless outreach, and dealing with mental health issues in the community. He is currently the Policy and Procedure Administrator for Public Safety at Stanford. He is also the chair of the San Mateo County Behavioral Health Commission, the president of the San Mateo County Chairs Activities League, and chair of the Redwood City Downtown Streets Team Community Advisory Board. He's a strong advocate for mental health issues. He also volunteers in the community and coaches the Foothill College women's basketball team. So having read through our three prestigious panelists' bios, I am already tired, but let's get started. Our first question for you three panelists here today is, what is a mental health disorder and how do they impair or affect our judgments and agency? Shall we start with Dr. Amy Bacharach?
Hi, thanks. It's Bacharach, like Bert. It's a tough one. So, so there are a variety of mental health disorders. Some they range from, quite mild to quite severe, and different types like internalizing things like depression and externalizing, things like aggression, things that cause aggression and violence and things like that. Generally speaking, a mental health disorder, your mental health in general is your overall well-being. So just talking about mental health doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about a disorder, but when we are talking about a disorder, we're generally talking about something that interferes on like really a daily basis or in a significant way with your physical or emotional or social well-being. The DSM is what psychologists use, and they have a wide variety of criteria that a person needs to meet to be diagnosed with a certain mental health disorder. And I also want to stress that, you know, a lot of times when we talk about mental health disorders, we talk about, you know, these psychological things or people being violent or things like that. But a lot of times also mental health disorders have to do with the physical body, things like headaches and pains and aches and things that seem, you know, uncontrollable. So, so yeah, that's pretty much my answer to that. I also want to note that even if a youth isn't necessarily diagnosed with a mental health disorder, he or she can still have, you know, these challenges, these psychological and emotional challenges. And certainly a lot of youth, particularly in the justice system, have trauma that may or may not be diagnosed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was reading a study from the US Department of Health and Human Services. It shows that over 49.5% of adolescents encounter a mental health disorder at some point in their lives. With that, why don't we move on to Dr. Michael Johnson? And once again, the question is, what is a mental health disorder and how do they impair or affect judgment and agency? Dr. Johnson, go ahead.
Well, when you look at, and I agree with Amy about, you know, internalizing and externalizing. We also looked at disorders as conduct disorders. Kids who have aggressive behavior, kids who have this stem for attention getting through negative behavior, things like that. And it reminds me of a child that I first actually was my first experience with a young teenager in with a conduct disorder and having it send him to jail. This kid was actually a friend of mine's son, somebody I grew up with, whose mother was really, really strict with her. And she always said to us is that when she has a child, she's not going to be that strict. She's not going to be that strict. And what happened was she wasn't. And he ended up coming to jail on a robbery charge, okay, because he didn't listen to people, okay? He thought he had it all together and knew it all because she did not give him the guidance and purpose of life. And that is also part of that conduct disorder and what we're talking about today is a mental health disorder. Okay, that not being guided and not being really given the purpose for having a good social life. Okay, and so that's pretty much what I'm thinking now.
Yeah, that's really important. And I certainly appreciate your observation there. And finally, we have Chris Rasmussen. And I'm sure you remember the question, Chris. But once again, for clarity, the question is, what is a mental health disorder and how do they impair or affect judgment and agency? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not gonna try and define it going after two doctors, that's for sure. But what I will say, you know, mental health, the stigma around it, it's really nothing to be ashamed of. It's a medical condition. It's a problem that can be treated, and that a vast majority of people live with mental illness and continue to function in their daily lives. I'll add that to the definition.
Yeah, it seems like mental health is an area that is often stigmatized in society, but as our three panelists have assured us, that it is more normal and I guess in a sense more out of our control than society seems to be teaching us. So my second question is related to this, and it's what are some causes of these mental health challenges? And I think that Dr. Johnson, your answer sort of alluded to this, but let me ask Chris first. What are some causes of these mental health challenges?
Some of the how it affects our judgment.
What causes the mental health challenges?
Oh, I think I'm going to leave that one to the doctors, but you know, certainly some of the things, you know, childhood abuse, trauma, neglect, you know, stress, long-term physical conditions, being homeless or having poor housing can contribute to your mental health. Obviously, drug and alcohol misuse could be a contributing factor, and significant trauma, especially with youth. A lot of the trauma that some youth face these days is a significant contributor.
Absolutely. Dr. Amy, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that Chris is absolutely right. I think that there's some evidence that certain psychological mental health disorders could be genetic or biological. So I think we have to keep that in mind. But I think a lot of times you have these what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and they come into play, and that includes things like abuse and neglect and household dysfunction, and can even be expanded to things like systemic racism and poor neighborhoods, and certainly things that poverty are related to as well. So I think that those ACEs have a big impact, kind of like what Chris was saying, on our mental health disorders. Also related to the justice system, we also know that the more ACEs a youth has, the greater the likelihood he or she is to be involved in the juvenile justice system. But also not just juvenile justice, but the more ACEs someone has, the more likely they are to have other health, just general health disorders, things like heart attacks and strokes and high blood pressure and things like that, well into adulthood. So these types of things, certainly contribute. Also, I want to say, related again to juvenile justice, but we talk about like abuse being a big part of it. And when you talk about girls in the system, between 80 and 100% of girls in the juvenile justice system have a history of sexual abuse. So I think that's something that, seriously contributes to the levels of depression and things like that. And then as they get older, women are also more than twice as likely than men to have depression. So another thing, sorry, I'm going to keep going. There are a million contributions to, things that could cause mental health. But some of the other things, like I mentioned, are, things like systemic racism and disparities in the system and in resources in the system. I don't want to take a lot of time, but, if anybody has questions, I can talk about like what some of those disparities are in the various systems, in poverty and insecurity and things like that. And we know that poverty is also related to both mental health and to involvement in the system. And then I think that the COVID pandemic has certainly exacerbated any mental health disorders or issues that people, youth and adults have had. So
Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, well, a number of things we haven't talked about. You guys are doing a great job. And by the way, Chris, as much as you've been in the field, and especially in law enforcement and things, you're a doctor as much as we are. Okay, it's about experiences and understanding what these things do, and you know that. So Dr. Rasmussen, thank you. But what I really wanted to add was that we also have kids who are born with autism, okay, at different levels. And there are levels of functioning that allow these kids with autism to function in life, but not get a clear understanding of what life is all about and how it works. And they end up in trouble, okay? And they end up in the system, for lack of a better way of saying it, and not even understanding how they got there, okay? But that happens. And then these kids get involved in drugs. And, those are clear causes of the mental health disorders, and how these kids are being affected by the drugs. Really, it causes a lot of issues for them and for their families and the living environment. And it just kind of festers more and more after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope this doesn't seem too redundant, but our third question is, why are mental health disorders so prevalent amongst teens and adolescents? Dr. Johnson, would you like to go first?
Sure. Again, it goes back to society now, okay? society now is a lot different from when I grew up. Okay, I'm a little older than the rest of you guys, but you know, we had drugs, but they weren't the types of drugs that are out there now. Okay, and it wasn't allowed to really be a part of society. It was people were just, you know, you use drugs, you tried it, and then it's like, okay, this is not working. Okay, this doesn't keep me functional. Okay, but now it's okay for people to take drugs and you know, be non-functional and be, you know, get themselves into issues. Okay, society doesn't allow it, but people in society allow for these things to happen, if that makes sense. Okay, people are more readily willing to allow their kid to drink at home as long as they think they're drinking at home. It's okay, you know, but that's not okay, you know, and that's one of the causes of this mental health disorders. Kids are drinking earlier, taking drugs and those types of things, and they're not being nourished with the right types of things of behavior to have in public.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy?
Yeah, I think that going back to what was already said, I do want to point out that a lot of times when you have substance use or substance abuse disorders, there's almost always it's called comorbidity, but there's also a mental health disorder there with it. So it's definitely important to talk about, you know, the substance use and the mental health disorders at the same time. But, you know, substance use aside, I think that because we have a lot of, you know, teens and people who have mental illness who aren't using substances, even though it's definitely a contributing factor for especially the youth who we work with, you know, in the justice system. But I think, you know, in general, like, I think, you know, a good point was made, like in today's, you know, today versus other years, like it's hard being a teen. I mean, you have forget the puberty and hormones. You have like so much pressure to be perfect and so much pressure to get good grades and get into the right college and participate and you know, do well in sports and do all of these things. And then on top of that, you have this sense, this isolation before COVID even, you know, happened. And then, you know, you have social media kind of piled onto all of that, which is, you know, you could do a whole webinar on the impacts of that. But I think that, you know, and then you have the isolation with COVID, which just exacerbated the whole thing. But I think, you know, in general, it's really hard being a teen. Like I empathize. It was hard enough for us to be teens, you know, a million years ago. Some of us, you know, between 500,000 and 2 million years ago, I guess. But it's, you know, I don't think it can be emphasized enough, like how much empathy we should have for these kids who are going through things that, you know, we never had to go through.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned social media, because I think that Chris will be able to shine some light on social media and those teen mental health effects. So I asked Chris the same question: why are mental health disorders so prevalent amongst teens?
Yeah, with all those things that doctors have said, we have to also remember that, you know, adolescent time is a time where hormones are changing and the brain is developing, and, you know, kids are growing into their adult bodies. And so, you know, that puts a huge risk on mental health issues compiling in with the social media and the exposure to violence and unstable households. So all of those things, and then now you have your brain developing and your hormones changing. It really puts these adolescents at risk. And you know, most of the diagnoses of mental illness usually, you know, some of them come, you know, around age 14, and then, you know, they usually develop by age 24. So that's right in the middle of all that. So adding all those in, I mean, you know, it's I don't wish to be a teenager now. I have a senior in high school, and luckily she does not do a lot of the social media, but, you know, we have seen a lot of cases with, you know, social media cases causing, anxiety disorders and eating disorders and, the body shaming and all those kind of things. So add in all the rest of that, it's just a real recipe for a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and this is a good segue. Dr. Johnson, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I did. That social media thing has just kind of opened these kids up to being able to see and do everything that goes on in society, and really not having the guidance to know what's really good for them and what's not. It's just really a difficult thing, and I just wanted to add that piece to that.
I'll also add to that, they can't really determine what's real and what's not. I mean, so much on social media isn't even real. And I think that, you get, and even the best well-adjusted teen, you have this sense of like, well, I'm not doing the things that these people are doing, or look at these happy pictures. I'm not that happy all the time, or, look at these vacations they're going on, or whatever it is. It's a lot of like comparing themselves to other people and other situations that may or may not be very realistic.
Right. I mean, you could even go on social media and learn how to make a bomb. It's just, and kids think, well, somebody can make it, so I guess I can try and make one too. Not even knowing exactly what they're doing. I'm sorry, I just kind of had to throw that in there.
Yeah, the issues of media and technology are quite interesting, and because of how new and unprecedented it is, it's quite challenging, I imagine, to accurately depict the effects of media and technology on mental health, or really on well-being in general. And
Yep.
I know Amy will get really excited by the fourth question, because now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of it all. The question is, first, what should the state juvenile justice system do to identify and solve mental health challenges when incidents occur? And second, what should the juvenile justice system or the community do to prevent or decrease the amounts of mental health disorders amongst their community? Chris, would you like to go first?
Oops. Sure. Well, I think that whenever possible, children with mental health conditions should be diverted into some sort of evidence-based mental health treatment in a community setting. If diversion, of the juvenile justice system isn't possible, then they should be placed in at least a restricted or the least restrictive environment that they can, with access to these evidence-based treatments. The juvenile justice system is just part of the growing trend of criminalization of the mentally ill. And, we have to have these children being able to access services that they can't access in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Johnson?
You know what? Repeat the question for me, please.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long question. First, what should the state juvenile justice system do to identify and solve mental health challenges when incidents occur? Second, what should the juvenile justice system or the community do to prevent or decrease the amount of mental health disorders amongst their community?
Okay. One of the things I think that the juvenile justice system should do is every child that comes in contact with the juvenile justice system needs to be assessed for a mental health problem issue. They need to assess them. They need to look at them, not just have one assessment, okay, but have an ongoing assessment for as long as that child is in the juvenile system. So I think that would help a lot, okay, and bring in more social workers or behaviorists to help with getting these kids to basically, we should be rehabilitating them, not just putting them in the system and saying, here, you're here now, get out, stay out of trouble. That's just not going to do it. I think you need to have more behaviorists in there helping these kids understand where they are, why they're there, and how the kid can resolve it themselves.
Absolutely. Amy?
Yeah, so you're right about that, Wesley. I am excited about this question because it is, the nitty gritty kind of policy issues. And I actually wrote out some of my thoughts on this because because it really is. I mean, there's so many things, and really there's no easy solution. These are like systemic issues and major things. I would say in the justice system, I completely agree. Like every single kid at intake should be getting a screening, not just for mental health, but for ACEs and for, other things as well. And then it would be great. I know some counties have done this where if you have like a justice system, like a physical justice system location where you have, if a kid is screened positive, like say for mental health, like somebody is physically there to like walk that kid down the hallway and say, here's the referral, like here's who you need to talk to, and then like kind of almost like physically hand them off. Because we know that, like there's so many barriers to people in general, but especially kids getting access. Like we know that only a very small percentage of kids who are getting referrals are actually have access to treatment, are actually getting treatment. So I think that, since there's no guarantee, I think it would be so great if we can have some kind of, system where kids can actually be like, handed off and get those services right then and there. I'll add that, we actually have, I'm going to make a little plug for our infographics on our court's website, because we have some amazing and depressing statistics and data on, the state of all of this in California. And we know that, for example, in 2020, only a very, very small percentage of kids who received a referral for mental health services actually got mental health services. So I think that's important. Also, I think that sometimes like it's an awareness issue. Sometimes there may be resources available, but the courts or the probation or whoever it is just don't know about them. And I think Medi-Cal and the EPDST, the early periodic screening diagnostic treatment, which is part of Medi-Cal and allows for specialty mental health services for kids. I think a lot of times, like the people who have access to these things don't necessarily know about these things. So I think, the more we can let the justice system stakeholders, the more we can make them knowledgeable about these things, and I think the better they can be resourced. And certainly there's always going to be a lack of, like right now we have a major lack of providers. So there are always going to be issues with that. But also, it's important to also realize that like being involved, just simply being involved in the justice system or in foster care really just exacerbates all of those needs. Yeah. And then for the community piece, and I can talk a long time about this and I'll try not to, but in the community piece, there are a lot of larger systemic issues that can both create and exacerbate these mental health disorders, especially in kids. There are ways that we can, at the policy level, we need to be like reducing poverty, which is, has such a huge contribution to these things. And there's a lot of, policy ways that we can do that I won't get into for, I'm going to try very hard not to be political here. So, there are a lot of ways that we can try and reduce poverty, particularly, in women. Like I said earlier, women are twice as likely as men to have depression, but also the number one one of the biggest causes of depression for women is having a baby and, being postpartum. Having a baby is also one of the largest causes of poverty in women. So I think that, a lot of these things aren't easy solutions, and they're more systemic solutions. Poverty is also associated with ACEs. It's associated with, all of the things that we're talking about. So, and then I think somebody mentioned earlier at a community level, I think it's also really important to try and reduce the stigma of talking about mental health in general, particularly, like cultural issues. I know there are a lot of cultural sensitivities and cultural stigmas. So I think that, it's really all about like increasing awareness and access to services. And I just want to repeat that I know that none of those are easy things to do.
There is no, oh, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
go for it, Dr.
Okay, I was gonna say, there is no easy answer to this at all.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is that we need to have more involvement of behaviorists in schools.
Yep.
Okay, who can identify these things early, and then who can actually push working on the issues that are there for that child. And what brought that to mind was I was working earlier today with a family where the kid is now a freshman in high school, but he was diagnosed with ADHD in 4th grade, but never received services from the school or the school district, you see. And those types of things are things that really we need to be able to address. Okay, as we see it early, let's address it early, and that'll help that child and that family adjust and hopefully being able to stay out of the system.
I think that's such an important point. Schools are like, almost the first level, like even before parents, because, parents don't necessarily understand mental health either. And they might not be aware of like what to look for and things to watch out for. So I think that schools are really like probably the most important resource that we have for, identifying, particularly, kids who aren't in the system, because, when they're in the juvenile justice system, obviously it's, our responsibility to make sure that, to keep a lookout. But, for everyday kids, like the school is typically their, their everyday place. So, yeah.
Right. And they, the other part of it is what you were talking about earlier is having people to start recognizing that mental health is something we need to address and be involved in and understand it, and that it's okay. It's okay to have a therapist. It's okay. Yeah. And I think we start teaching that earlier or getting that involvement earlier, it will become a part of society.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, would you like to share something?
Yeah, well, a lot of that is also, normalizing it. I'm a family member of a stepdaughter with severe mental illness. And, I say that openly and freely because that's my truth. And that's how I got into this business kind of is through going through the juvenile justice system and going through the mental health system with her as a child. And so, making it normal by saying these things, there's a lot of us that have these things, and a lot of the boards and commissions I sit on, that's kind of our introduction is, who is it you? Are you a client or are you a family member of someone with mental illness? Because we pretty much all are.
Right.
A lot of things that we're doing on the commission, we started what we call a youth SOS program, support. Gosh, I can't remember the acronym now. Support and stabilization. There's an O in there somewhere. But what we found was that, as being a police officer, we would get calls to the schools all the time for mental health issues. And, when a kid is in crisis, I know the last thing they want to see is a, big, scary police officer walking in, wanting to help them. And depending on which police officer you got, whether they were more or less compassionate to the circumstances, you don't know what's going on. So one of the things we did as our commission in San Mateo County is we established the Youth SOS program, which is a crisis response team for children and primarily at schools, to take those calls off the police officers' plates, so they can, respond to those and help with that crisis. The other thing that we have in our county here is what we call a SMART program, which is it's a quasi-ambulance. So instead of bringing a big old ambulance out, and having that at the school, and that's even more stigmatizing, right? You have a police officer show up, you have a big ambulance show up, you have this kid in crisis, and now they got to do the walk of shame out to the ambulance. That's very traumatizing, especially when you're in crisis and you're a kid and your parents aren't there and the principals are calling. And, so we have a SMART program, which is kind of a low-key van. There's a paramedic on the van, and they come out in these circumstances and will take adults and children as well. One of the things we did, we just presented to the Board of Supervisors some recommendations on crisis responses. And what we found here in San Mateo County is the need for more crisis stabilization centers. Well, not more, How about one? We don't have any type of crisis stabilization center in our county at all here. And what that is more like a home, almost like an emergency room for mental health. There's beds, there's peer support, there's licensed clinicians, there's non-clinical professionals that are there to help with, assessment, diagnosis, treatment planning, monitoring, medications, referrals, and linkages. So it's kind of the whole one-stop shop, no wrong door kind of service. So we're recommending to the Board of Supervisors that we create some of those in our county. So those are a couple things, my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I find that having resources available at the county level and fine tuning those resources so that it's the least stigmatizing it could be and the most available it could be is vitally important. And I'm grateful for Chris and the Behavioral Health Commission for doing that in San Mateo County, where I'm from right now. And I have a follow-up to this question. More pointedly, what role do youth courts play in addressing mental health and adverse childhood experiences? And how do mental health challenges fit into the school to prison pipeline and many of these disparities that we see? Whoever wants to go first, please. Go.
I have a thought about that. I think, well, first of all, I think that we all have a role to play in this. Anybody involved in any tangential way to these kids and to the system, we all have a role to play. I think that one of the things, gosh, it's so hard to verbalize. One of the things I think that contributes to the school to prison pipeline is a lack of understanding and awareness in how to deal with a lot of these kids. And I think somebody mentioned in the comments, it's even more pronounced. It could be more pronounced in neurodivergent kids, but we don't really have an understanding. And I think it goes back to, like, earlier we talked about conduct disorder, and I think that, very generally speaking, there are certainly kids out there who have conduct disorder, don't get me wrong, but I think that we as a community, I guess, tend to throw out diagnoses because it's easy. And again, I'm not saying that that's all the time, and there are definitely kids who have diagnosable major mental health disorders. But I think that a lot of times we do this without recognizing how those diagnoses or labels can follow kids into adulthood. And right now I'm speaking more about,
Did we lose her?
Yeah, she froze. She's still talking probably.
It's like she cut out.
Okay,
Well,
so
she makes a great point. I think the judges also need to be more up to speed on some of these conditions as well, because kids were being sent to prison because they had a mental health disorder. And I think that's hopefully has been changing now with all the work that the Juvenile Justice Prevention has been doing. But I think that's a big deal that we need to make sure that these kids are taken care of in our own communities.
Yeah, I know the Behavioral Health Commission and the Juvenile Justice Commission in San Mateo County are really interconnected, and the pinnacle to that connection is Chris and his wife Johanna, who are at the forefront of any project in San Mateo County. It seems like they are always ahead of the curve in terms of having ideas and having the drive to push forward this continual struggle of mental health, juvenile justice, behavioral health. So great thanks to the Rasmussen family. But I'm sure that Amy would point this out, but I feel like the Judicial Council of California and state agencies such as the Office of Youth and Community Restoration, such as the Council on Criminal Justice and Behavioral Health, which is, by the way, here at this roundtable, today. So we need more of the interagency discussion, and we need more guidance and sort of policy from the state on how to address mental health and solve the issues of the school to prison pipeline and of class struggles in general. And I noticed that Amy joined back.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
It just happened. It's technology.
I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry. I was just about to like try and turn on my hotspot on my phone. I'm like,
Oh, it looks like she cut out again.
Yep.
So in the meantime, I just wanted to note that for all of our participants, whether you're joining in the actual Zoom meeting or you're on Facebook or another platform, that we will have a Q&A session after this final question and after our panelists' comments. So if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat or chat one of our hosts, and we will be happy to compile these questions, or you could ask them verbally to one of our panelists. So we are really excited for that. In the meantime, Dr. Johnson, do you want to share about your thoughts on the school to prison pipeline and youth?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, and this is really simple. I think one of the things we need to do is to really look at and really gain insight into the teachers and educators that we're hiring into these schools now. Okay, a lot of what I've seen, and I hate to say this, but a lot of what I see now is teachers who are really not in love with teaching, okay, but more in love with having a job, okay? And we need teachers who really want to teach kids and be whole about what they do and understanding and how they get these kids to grasp what's going on, okay? A lot of kids now, and I hear it a lot, is I'm bored, you know, in school. I'm bored, so I just try and, you know, and so there's so many different modes of teaching that people have to have. And it's difficult. Do not get me wrong, it's difficult because teaching, and I tried it, teaching, if you're not in love with it, you know, it's one of those things where you're just trying to get through the day, okay? And that's not helping these kids, okay? And so we're really allowing kids to really kind of do whatever they want, okay? And you know, not really understand, because teaching is more than just teaching a subject, but it's teaching a kid how to be in society. And that's a big part of it, okay? And so that to me, that's one of the major pieces of that school to the prison pipeline we're talking about.
Yeah, I hope Amy is able to join, because I was just about to wave this book, which I know the Judicial Council was involved in. It's Judge's Guide to Mental Health Jargon. And I feel like we need more of that, maybe for police officers, Chris, or maybe for educators, like Dr. Johnson and the people you work with. Amy, I'm glad you are able to join. Let's hope you don't cut out again.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening with my connection.
I was showing them this from the Judicial Council, and I hope that you could shine some light on the work that the Judicial Council is doing in this field.
Sorry, I came back in a little bit late. I'm not sure what you're asking me to elaborate on.
Yeah, it's the same question, the school to prison pipeline and juvenile justice. If you could talk about, from a policy or state governance standpoint, what you would like to see change, or what you would like to see added to our mental health laws and to our mental health programming, I guess. Please feel free to comment.
Sure, thanks. Well, I know, you know, a few years ago, we had a great report that came out called Keeping Kids in Schools. And that, you know, covered, it was, you know, something that the Chief Justice was also really excited about, the topic. And so we've done, you know, some work in that. I think, you know, policy wise, again, it's about like awareness and resources and making sure that, you know, judges and probation officers and attorneys and police even understand what's available out there. I think particularly when it comes to like Medi-Cal, you know, you have all of these services available and people don't know that they're there, or if they do know that they're there, they don't know how to access them. So I think that is, and we're doing several webinars right now for judges on Medi-Cal and also schools, you know, resources, school-based resources and things like that. So yeah, I think that all of that contributes to the pipeline.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Johnson, do you have a closing comment or?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was our last question. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for all their elaborate answers. It was really informative. So now we'll move on to a Q&A session, and we will ask our panelists some questions that we've been holding up as they present. So I guess I'll begin, and then if you have any questions you'd like to ask via chat, please chat them to Noah, or you could raise your hand and ask them verbally. But my first question is, from your perspective, I know mental health disorders or mental health challenges is a broad theme, but what specifically are some of the most disruptive or some of the most, I guess, popular mental health struggles that you have encountered? And what are some ways that parents or classmates or neighbors or friends could help in that regard? And
Well, can I go?
Yeah.
I would like to bring into the conversation, you know, suicide. You know, it's not really talked about as a mental illness or mental health, but you know, suicide's very prevalent. You know, Stanford lost, you know, 2 students last year to suicide. If you remember, one was a very good soccer player. And, you know, we don't talk about it enough. We don't put it out there enough. We don't recognize the symptoms enough. We don't reach out enough to people, family, community members. And that, you know, we need to start doing that. So just bringing that up, saying that, putting it out there that, you know, if you know somebody, you hear about somebody's having a bad day, or you're recognizing depression in somebody in your family, reach out to them. And because it's preventable, we can prevent suicide. We have 988 now, which is a good number to call. It goes to the suicide crisis hotline. So whatever you need to talk about for 988, they're available for you. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
So one of the things that we do as PACE is as Wesley had said earlier, the acronym is for Parents, Educators / Teachers, and Students in Action. Okay, and we work with the Los Angeles County Teen Court Superior Court Teen Court program. Okay, so kids who come into who are recommended, instead of sending them to juvenile court, they send them to a diversion program, which is the Superior Court Teen Court program, where they're judged by their peers. Okay, but one of the other things we do is we go into schools. Okay, we put we have graduate student interns, social work interns that we place into schools, and they're in the schools to really help the school with behavioral issues, kids with academic issues. One of the things that we really look at is having our interns work as tutors as well as therapists. Okay, so they utilize the tutoring opportunity to really get in touch with these kids and their environments and where they're living and how they're doing, and you know, being able to touch the issues with them. So, you know, what I'm saying is that I think that, and it's working, but really is that this is another manner of really reaching out to these kids to break off that prison pipeline thing. You know, it's really about getting to these kids as early as we can, okay, and helping them and letting them know that, hey, there's somebody there, you know, who you can turn to, you can talk to, you can come with issues and really work with them on it.
And as we can see by this roundtable alone, there are people like Amy, like Dr. Johnson, like Chris, who are interested and ready to help and join the fight to solve these mental health challenges that are popular amongst adolescents. I see Derek raise his hand. So Derek, what's your question?
Yeah, this is a follow-up to something Chris said. Is the 988 number, is that a statewide number or just a local emergency number?
Federal.
Yeah, it's a statewide number. It's a
It
statewide
is.
number. Yeah, it's beginning to roll out. It rolled out in July, I believe, of this year. It's beginning to roll out. So yeah. Actually,
Okay.
It's a mental health 911 number. Actually, it's 988, but it's a mental health emergency. Yeah.
correct.
Is well, I'm assuming the Office of Youth and Community Restoration has that, but I've been monitoring some of their activities and I haven't seen that. That should be something that would be highly advertised and should really get out there. Chris, you and I have a parallel background. I spent 42 years in the law enforcement arena, ending with the FBI, starting with local law enforcement with the sheriff's office. But a part of my career was I was chief investigator in the Health and Welfare Agency and did a lot of healthcare fraud. And I just wanted to throw that out too, that, mental health is one thing. There was a code section, it was called 368 of the Penal Code, and it was crimes against idiots, lunatics, and insane persons that I was instrumental in changing to crimes against dependent adults. And it included psychological, it included financial, and it included physical abuse. I just wanted to throw that out, that those are some things that really need to be promoted and reviewed. And Chris, I appreciate you and all the work you've done, as well as both doctors. What I'm hearing is, no two cases are alike. Everything has to be individualized. And instead of the way that when I was in the law enforcement arena full time, it was you treated everybody the same. Where nowadays you really have to do some independent. No two cases are alike, and I agree with everything we're saying here. That's just what I want to say. But I was interested in the 988 number because I had not heard of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Noah has received some questions, so he's going to field it to our crew. And then Don, you also have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I just also want to say too about 988, that's not just in the state, it's across the
That's
country.
a federal thing.
Yeah, so if you know other organizations who it could be valuable with, it is not, that are not in California, it's still incredibly valuable, and also is not just for people experiencing suicidal thoughts, but for any type of mental health crises. So I want to make sure we're getting that right information out there to the communities. The question that I did receive, I received a couple. One, it wasn't directed to anyone in particular, but I think Amy, you spoke a little bit about trauma. Somebody asked first, what is trauma? And I think then a good follow-up is that there's been a lot of discussion today about trauma and adverse childhood experiences. And do you think this is a fad or part of a larger shift?
Well, I definitely don't think it's a fad. I'm hoping that it's a larger shift. I mean, now we have so much research and so much evidence, showing what, the long-term impacts of these ACEs are. Going back to trauma, gosh, I don't know if I've ever been asked to define trauma, but it should be like the number one thing. Let me see if I can think of a definition for it. I would say it's probably any event that impacts your well-being, similar to I guess a similar definition to a mental health disorder. It's something that you experience either directly or indirectly. And then that impacts kind of the way you think and feel and experience life, based on that. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Don, do you have a question?
Now, I wanted to let people know something we're doing here in Marin County. We divert young people from criminal prosecution, then we moved upstream to divert suspensions. And because we have a really good relationship with the San Rafael School District, we're now going into elementary and doing community building circles,
Great.
which is a place for young people to bring their lived experience to a non-judgmental supportive setting. And during that time, we're able to identify which children have high ACEs and help them get some healing before they hit middle school. One thing we've noticed is if a child is engaged in aberrant behavior that's driven by trauma in middle school, there's very little tolerance for looking at what's driving the aberrant behavior and a lot of punitive discipline.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was trying to get at when my internet cut out. So sorry about that.
Yeah, I see that Noah has some questions from the chat, and Derek also has his hands up.
I think I can go. The question from the chat, and keep sending them to me, or feel free to raise your hand as well. Question is, again, general, I think, to maybe everyone, since from different perspectives, how can we address basically what Mickey just asked? How can we address trauma and ACEs or social determinants of health? I'll add that on from Mickey's perspective in a youth court, youth council, peer court program.
I hate to do this to you, but could you repeat that, please?
Yes, there was. How can youth court, youth councils, peer courts address trauma and ACEs in their programs?
I think it's important to start by, I guess, teaching and training everybody just as a standard part of the training of being part of the youth court. Like, this is trauma, and these are what ACEs are, and this is what happens when, or this is what could happen when you experience these things, and these are the long-term impacts of them. And how do we incorporate trauma-informed care and culturally competent care, because I think that those two things are keys to helping, as opposed to somebody mentioned earlier, having like this one-size-fits-all treatment plan or service for these kids, and you can't really do that. Like, every kid has his or her own experiences, so you kind of need to address them and meet the kids like really where they are.
Right.
Some kids are going to be more resilient, and other kids are going to need a lot more help. And I think it's important to recognize all that before you can figure out what specifically to do.
Are there any other questions from our audience on any platform that you're watching this from? If not, I guess I also have another question. And
I'm sorry, Mickey has said something here in the chat that, could you expound on that, Mickey?
Sure. Yeah, I was kind of referring back to that question because it was one of the things that I've found that, youth court programs, we get the kids in crisis often, and yet we aren't always, or haven't always built out the programs to be able to deal with the crisis. Some youth courts have, some haven't. Some are still kind of like, you come in, you do the hearing, you get case managed in your community service, you do your jury duty, and you're gone. But we have these, when we get these kids in, and we know almost not all, but most all of them have some need, or they wouldn't be in our program in the first place. So there are, when our court for a long time used counseling interns, of the folks that were in the PPS and LPPC programs at Cal State San Bernardino and the University of Redlands to come in and do some of their hours working with our kids. We provided, a lot of different restorative practices, but really what we tried to do is build all of our case management or all of our time or the time we have them at court outside of their hearing with programs that work on those 40 developmental assets. We know that those are what help heal or build resilience from the ACEs. So how do we put those things in place? And part of it is you have to have funding and the community connections and to be able to provide those services, right? Spending time building that one positive adult relationship that child can count on that maybe not there, helping them have positive peer pressure or positive peer relationships and positive peer modeling and behaviors and conversations and a place that they can come to where there's a lot of trust, so that's the student that's going through the youth court process can actually feel free to talk about their needs or their issues and how we could have those addressed for them. So I was trying to type that really quickly because I know we're time, but a lot of times we think of youth court as the hearing, and one of the things that I found is it's not the hearing that makes the difference. It's the time after the hearing. It's the time building empathy and being able to hear other students say the same kinds of things and going through the same kinds of things that they are, and them being empowered to be the expert to give advice to that other student. It's the time that they spend with those positive peers. It's the time that they spend with positive adults. It's the time that they spend not being seen as a detriment or a bad kid or a behavior issue, but seen as having agency and how we provide that agency to them. So that's my answer to that question. And I'm sorry if I made that too long, but I'm really passionate about that part of youth court.
You were great, but can I add to that PESA, we get these kids and we work with them before they get to teen court, okay? We start working with them to prepare them actually for teen court, okay? And start, use our graduate students as therapists to work with the issues that they have. And we really want them to go into the teen court session, prepared to speak the truth, okay? And letting them know that, hey, you're going to be judged by teenagers, okay? Yeah. The same people that you are, okay? And it really impacts them because kids, kids know kids. And they know when you're not telling the truth, and they know when you got, something else is going on in your life that you need to look at and work on. Okay, and so it's really exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And I'll add, there's also tons of research out there showing the importance of, peer-to-peer networks and
right.
influence.
Absolutely.
And I would just say, and just knowing we have an opportunity to not be a one and done, to be a place where they know that they can come if and that builds trust and builds resilience and builds a place where they can come if they're in danger of recidivism. Not, yep. If somebody's trying to get them back in trouble, if they're that, or they can, they can rely on us to help get them,
right. That safe place for them.
That safe place.
Absolutely. Sorry, Wesley.
Yeah, and with regard to research, at this year's California Association of Youth Court Summit, one of our keynote speakers was Professor Elizabeth Kaufman from UC Irvine, and she has been on the forefront of psychological adolescent development and juvenile justice, trauma-informed response. So it's really interesting to see the research that's happening in the field of juvenile justice and the major implications it has on how we proceed with, first of all, trying youth as adults. Apparently that's still done in some places, but also in responding to these situations where we need clinicians, we need social workers, we need people who are able to identify and help and support young people, not just for the short term, but continually and for the long term. And I know Noah has some questions, so I'll let him ask those.
Great. This question is directed towards Chris, and it's actually from me. And I'm curious as someone who runs a program like ours, like the youth court. I'm really interested to hear your perspective around the trauma and ACEs, because I think when I work with a lot of our law enforcement partners. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstandings about what that means. Sort of ideas that it's sort of soft or to cut huggy feely type of thing rather than a social an evidence-based approach and understanding what that looks like. So I'm just curious, Chris, what your thoughts are on how to approach law enforcement partners or criminal justice partners around having these conversations.
I think it's important to remember too, law enforcement's changing right now. And I think, we're getting more of those social worker minded people that want to be police officers now. Back in the day, it was more military, it was more, people coming out of the military, it was more of that. And I think the way that society has gone in these last few years, where law enforcement was at a real low, all-time low, right? And there was a lot of people not wanting to be police officers and not even wanting to be in the profession. And I think that's going to swing back. And I think we're going to get more people that are more compassionate, more social oriented, that want to do this job or want to do that job. I'm no longer a police officer, I'm retired. But I think, a lot of agencies are going to now like crisis intervention training, CIT training, which gives, officers the skills to deal with these type of situations, to de-escalate, to be more, compassionate, how to deal with certain type of people, certain type of events. And so I think that's kind of the normal right now, is that most agencies are training their officers in this crisis intervention training. And now they even have an enhanced model, enhanced crisis intervention training too. So I think you're going to see more officers that are at least trained to deal with these kind of situations. And a lot of times there could be units or could be specialized officers that are working in these type of areas. And those are the type of people that are interested in working in those fields, and they have some type of interest. So they're going to learn more. They're going to want to be there more. They're not, just an officer off the street that's just, has to do a call or do something. So you're getting these specialized units. We have a PERT unit here in our county, psychiatric emergency response team, and they go out and deal with all kinds of situations. And it's a clinician and a deputy that work together. And they're selected to be in that role. So they have to go through an interview process. They got to go through training. And so they want to be there. They want to do this type of work. That's one thing is, as police officers, we do all kinds of different things. There's gang enforcement officers, there's narcotics officers, there's officers that want to have a dog, so you have to find that officer that wants to do this type of work to really get the best out of them and to get the best results. Does that answer your question?
And if I can add, over the last decade, a lot of probation departments have also shifted from hiring like criminal justice majors to social work majors. So very similar.
Derek, do you have a question or?
Yeah, I just a quick comment, and Chris, maybe you can back me up on this. Peace Officer Standards and Training, which is the state agency that oversees law enforcement in California. I do know that they have either incorporated in the basic academy more enhanced mental health education and treatment, at least introductory levels to new peace officers going out on the street. I don't know if they have advanced training courses. Chris, do you?
No, I'm retired.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Me too. I've been away from it for a while, but certainly we can look into, or I can, and I will. I'll look at posts. I'll contact the executive director, who's a former colleague of mine with the FBI, and we'll find out what they have, what they are doing in terms of training, threshold training for law enforcement in that regard. And I'll do that probably the next week or so, and I'll report back.
So we scheduled to end at 4:45. So before we leave, I'm gonna just put an exit survey because in our world of data and technology, it's really important that we get accurate feedback and accurate results from all the events that we do. So I just put a Google form in the chat. If you're a participant here today, we encourage you to fill it out so we could better understand the needs of our community and what we could do better for our next roundtable. And I already see this coming, but it would be great if we could have more of these discussions where we have folks like Chris who represent a police officer, law enforcement background, who also do a lot of advocacy at the community and at the local level. But we also have policy people who work in a policy role, such as Amy from the Judicial Council, and also Dr. Johnson, who does social work and behavioral health down in Los Angeles, a very critical area. So if we could have more of these discussions, interagency and interregional, then I think that we are moving in the right direction. So I'm really happy that we were able to have this discussion here today. And I'm gonna turn it over to Derek to close this roundtable discussion out.
Well, thank you, everybody. I don't have anything else to add. I think it was very informative. We put this on Facebook, and we also will have it on our website for the California Association of Youth Courts, and we'll get this presentation out and around. And certainly, I encourage you to look at our website and make suggestions to it, add comments, let us know how we're doing, and I look forward to all of you helping us and supporting youth courts statewide. I'm the interim president. Hopefully we're going to be finding a permanent person to fill the void. Right now, I'm keeping the balls up in the air, and what started out to be a little part-time volunteer work is now a full-time job for me. And thank God for Wesley. I gotta clap hands for Wesley and his crew in putting this together. Magnificent job. Outstanding young man, and we're proud to have him on our team as he's demonstrated today. So I just want to close by saying thank you one and all. Good to see you, Noah and Don, and a few others from the board, Mickey. I think Amir was there, and I know that I think even our previous president, Judge Irvin, was probably. Hopefully, I tried to encourage him to chime in, as well as some chief probation officers and what have you. I don't know if they were able to do that. But anyhow, I just want to close on time and say thank you, everybody, and appreciate everybody. Stay healthy and happy and wise. And my God, we need all the help we can get. That's an understatement. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much
And I
for
put my
having
email
us.
in the chat.
Thank you for having
so
us.
I could
Thank you very
field
much.
any questions or make any introductions from the people you see on this roundtable here today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Wesley.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Wesley, Derek.